How are you? I want to ask PowerPoint. There you go. I'll put that up later about Hollywood heroes. But I want to ask you, how did we, in about 3 years, in the Kavanaugh hearings, how did we go from believe every woman to what's a woman?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
How would I know? I'm not a biologist. Actually, as you know, the Babylon Bee has had some fun with this. Kindergartner granted PhD in biology after correctly distinguishing boy from girl. I know it's a little funny, but it's also really serious that we have someone who gets to the Supreme Court who is not willing to acknowledge what everybody in the room knows, what a woman is and what a man is. She could have said, our Constitution defines a woman in the biological way. If that wants to be changed, or if someone wants to change that via the legal process, that needs to be done through Congress, not through the courts. She could have said that, but she didn't. But it's actually much worse than that. Because just last week, President Joe Biden actually talked about what is now known as Trans Visibility Day. And he talked about how trans people are so brave and how they're made in the image of God. And of course, he's right. Everyone is made in the image of God. He was actually quoting from Genesis 1:27. But Genesis 1:27 says that he made them in the image of God, male and female. And he just left that part out. Then his administration put out some documents on gender-affirming care. And one of the documents says, and you can find this on the White House website or the HHS website, one of the documents says that young people as young as 3 to 5 years old may actually think they're the opposite sex. And you, as a parent, need to affirm that. So if your 3-year-old young little boy comes to you and says, Mommy, Daddy, I'm a girl, you need to affirm that they're a girl. This is what it actually says. And then another document from his administration actually says this, and this is a quote. There is no scientifically sound research showing negative impacts from providing gender-affirming care. Let me stop right there. That's false. Because there is no long-term research on providing gender-affirming care to 3 or 5-year-olds. It doesn't exist. And yet he says there's nothing negative about it. Implication, since we don't know of any negative outcomes from gender-affirming care, which means you must affirm what your little child says he or she is, we're going to say there are no negative aspects to it, when in fact common sense shows that there are. Anyway, let me continue with what it says. The decision for the child welfare system to become involved in the lives of families, potentially to the extent of removing children from their families and homes. Do you see where this is going? Do you see what the President of the United States is saying? That if you as a parent don't affirm what your 3 to 5-year-old says he or she is, we just might come and take them from you. I'm not making this up. This was just put out last week. But he goes on to say, oh, it must be done with great care. We want to prioritize the well-being of children and the preservation of families. Where did this come from? Well, it's been at our universities for many years, actually. In fact, the Washington Family Policy Council, 5 or so years ago, went to a couple of universities in Washington state. You've probably seen some of these videos. I'm going to show you one of them right now. It's about a 4-minute video where Joseph Backholm, who I think is now at the Colson Center, goes and interviews kids at Seattle University to ask them, is there really a difference between men and women? Here is what they found.
In light of all the conversation about gender and identity, we began to wonder if there's even a difference between men and women anymore. We went to Seattle University to find out.
Aware of the conversation going on in Washington State right now around kind of gender identity, gender expression issues, and the ability to access facilities on those grounds?
Yeah, like, you know, there's gender neutral bathrooms in like all the dorms and stuff like that.
I think that gender is fluid, so if you want to use a bathroom because that's a place and that's a space where you feel comfortable and safe in doing so, then I think that that's completely fine.
I think that if whoever you think you are, if you're male or female, then that's the bathroom you should go into.
I think if it doesn't really negatively affect anybody, then I think anyone should be able to choose what gender they choose to identify as.
People, no matter what their gender identification is, they should be allowed to use whatever restrooms they feel like they identify with.
Is there a difference in your mind between men and women?
No, yes. I mean,
Possibly. In general, yes. But I don't know why I think that.
Socially, currently, yes, there is. There is no need for that difference to exist, scientifically and logically.
If you think that you're a male, if you think that you're a female, that matters more than the biological difference.
There's not much difference besides what society forces onto people.
And how do you know the difference between men and women?
By what people think they are. So you can't like judge someone just on like their looks.
I don't think there's any one way to really distinguish between a man or a woman, and I don't think it's necessary.
It's not always consistent. It has a high probability, like 98% of the time I can get it right. There is some ambiguity.
I think, yeah, there are ways to tell, but then again, you can always be wrong.
What would you say I am?
Just judging off of your looks, I would say that you're a male. I would probably assume a man, but then you never know.
A male.
Why would you say that?
Based on how I look at you.
Do you think that's a problem?
Yeah, probably.
Do you think the difference between men and women matters for any reason?
No, not really.
I think most sociologists agree that the concept of gender is more of a societal construct.
I do think it matters somewhat, yeah.
To me, no. I don't feel as if it matters to me because at the end of the day, the person is just a person.
No, I don't think it should matter.
And the differences on a social level are simply a product of a biased society.
Then is there a reason to have those labels, male and female?
I don't think so. I think that it's, again, a social construct of this binary that we're given at birth. There is kind of a difference, but at the same time, if someone wants to identify as one or both or as nothing, I also find that completely okay.
There may be nothing more self-evident in the natural universe than the fact that every animal species is divided into two halves, male and female. Yet the most intelligent of those species seems to be wrestling with whether male or female are actually real things. Have we discovered something new, or have we become too clever for our own good?
Sometimes when I call a lady sir by accident, they get very offended.
If you repeat a lie enough, people will believe it, and you will even come to believe it yourself, said the chief Nazi propagandist of World War II. Literally, we have people who have gotten to the Supreme Court who actually believe this, or at least don't have enough courage to say they don't believe it. Paul says, if you suppress the truth long enough, you're going to engage in futile thinking. Your foolish heart will be darkened. And not only will you, be doing evil things, you will be cheering on other people that do evil things. In his letter to the Romans, chapter 1. How did we get here? You know how we got here? We got here because we, even in the church, unfortunately, have been preaching, you really ought to follow your heart. Follow your heart. That's what you're supposed to do. So I want to address that question. Should you follow your heart? And we're going to try and do it in 3 steps. First of all, why do we have an identity crisis? It appears people don't even know who they are sexually now. Secondly, do I have a right to live my truth? Because you hear people saying, you live your truth, I live my truth. Sounds so right, doesn't it? And then finally, we're going to answer the question directly, should I follow my heart? So let's start here at point 1. Why do we have an identity crisis? Well, there are 3 ways to find your identity. You can look outside yourself, you can look inside yourself, or you can look up to your Creator. Those are the 3 ways you can find your identity. And in ancient culture, you actually looked out to your family. Look, if your dad was a potter, you were a potter. If your dad was a blacksmith, you were a blacksmith, at least vocationally. And of course, women took care of the home. That's what ancient culture said. You were determined, your identity was determined by your family. In modern culture, your identity is determined by your heart. You look inside. You don't look out, you look in. You follow what your heart wants. And so, in order to follow your heart, you need to cross every stream. You need to swim every ocean. You need to climb every mountain. Is this some kind of Disney movie or something? It's in one of those movies. It's in like every Disney movie, right? That's what you're supposed to do. And of course, religious culture says, no, you don't do that. You follow the rules. Actually, none of these are the Christian culture, by the way. None of this is Christianity. But let's talk about following your heart, because that's really where our modern culture is telling us to go, to follow our hearts. Now, if you notice, if you want to look at this visually, a lot of people think that if they have an idea on their heart, that somehow is their identity. That's their identity. That's why if you say to somebody, your behavior, say sexual behavior, is wrong, they think you're attacking them personally. Because you see, they are their sexual behavior. That's their identity. So you're attacking them. In effect, what we have now, even in the church, is much more meology than theology. It's whatever I want, whatever's on my heart is right. That's what the whole big deconstruction movement is about. That's what so-called progressive Christianity is about. In fact, Elisa Childers is here. I'm sure she'll be talking about that. By the way, progressive Christianity is neither progressive nor Christian, because if you are getting further away from Jesus, you're not progressing, you're regressing. And if you're disagreeing with Jesus, how can you call yourself a Christian? You don't disagree with Jesus and call yourself a Christian. So you are not what you think about. We need to separate you from your thoughts. Look, if you were what you thought about, most men would be women and most women would be chocolate. So you are not what you think about. But there is some truth to what you think about. There is some truth to what you think about actually determining your identity, but we'll get to it a little bit later, but not in this sense, all right? So, why do we have an identity crisis? There could be 1,000 different things on your heart, and as we'll see here in a few minutes, they'll change. And so your identity can actually change if your identity is based what you think about, or it's based on some idea or desire you have on your heart. That's why we have an identity crisis. It's not stable. It keeps moving. So that's point 1. Point 2, do I have a right to live my truth? Because you hear people saying this all the time. You got your truth, I got my truth. You live your truth, I live my truth. I mean, this is so Oprah, right? It sounds so right. But is there such a thing as my truth? Well, whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand and he said to him, Colonel, I want the truth. And Nicholson said, you can't handle the truth. He didn't say it that way. If he said it that way, the movie would have gone nowhere. You can't handle that. That's not how he said it. Here's how he said it.
I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
All right, let's try that again. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. That was much better. President Phil, that was pretty good, wasn't it? You guys are charged up now. Didn't you always want to come into church and yell at the guy up here? You can't handle the truth. That just makes you feel so much better, doesn't it? Well, there's a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying, you got your truth, I got my truth. There is no the truth. All truth is relative. You've heard these claims. Now, since this is an apologetic conference, this is second nature to most of you in here. But in case you haven't heard this, anybody who claims something like there is no truth is uttering what we call a self-defeating statement. So if someone says there's no truth, what question are you going to ask that person? Yes, is that true? Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? Yes. I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough, but that's because it's self-defeating. It violates the law of non-contradiction. And if you're not familiar with this, you need to take a course in logic with Richard Howe at Southern Evangelical Seminary, because he will straighten you right out on these issues, all right? This is self-defeating. And what you do in order to discover a self-defeating statement is to turn the claim on itself. Turn the claim on itself. So someone says there's no truth, you turn the claim on itself and you say, is that true? A self-defeating statement is something like this, or if I were to say I can't speak a word in English, what would you say? Right? You're using English to say it. It's obviously a self-defeating statement, all right? So sometimes people don't say it this way. I hear atheists saying, well, I never hear anybody saying there's no truth. Well, actually, postmodernists do. They claim it's true that there's no truth, and relativists do. But sometimes they're a little bit more subtle. Sometimes they'll say it this way, right? All truth is relative. If somebody says that and you turn the claim on itself, what question are you going to ask back? Yeah, is that a relative truth? No, this is an absolute truth claiming all truth is relative. It defeats itself. Now, actually, today, it's not even said this way as much as it used to be said this way. Now it's said this way. There isn't the truth, only my truth. You have your truth, I have my truth. Let's just live our truths, we'll all get along, right? This is also self-defeating, however. Why? If someone were to say, there isn't the truth, only my truth, what question would you ask them? You all sound like Charlie Brown's teacher right now. You know that? It's like, Anyone want to raise their hand and really give an answer? Is that your truth? Now you're getting there, right? All you need to ask them is say, is that just your truth or the truth? Because if this claim up here is just your truth, in other words, it's just your opinion, why should I believe it? It's just a preference for you. But if it's the truth, your very claim says there isn't any such thing as the truth. Do you see the problem? It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. I know this is very unpopular in our culture today, but there's no such thing as your truth or my truth. There's just the truth. I mean, to say you have your own truth, you might as well just say I have my own math. Right? Suppose you hire me to do a job for you and you say, Frank, I'll pay you $10 an hour. And I work 15 hours and I go, great, I'm done. You owe me $15,000. And you go, well, hold on, I don't owe you $15,000. I owe you $150. Oh, no. I have my own math. You owe me $15,000, right? You're going to go, you're crazy. Well, that's right. I am crazy. I don't have my own math. I don't have my own truth either. Truth is truth. And all truth is God's truth. So there's no such thing as my truth or your truth. There's just the truth. I know it's unpopular, but those people who claim all there are my truths, that happens to be the truth. You with me? Now, here's the main difference, it seems, between people who are theologically and politically on the right and people who are theologically and politically on the left. Here's the question. Can we change reality to fit our beliefs and behaviors? Because, look, truth is what corresponds to reality. You could put it this way. Can we change truth to fit our beliefs and behaviors? Can we change reality to fit our beliefs and behaviors? What do you think the answer to that is? No. This is what those on the political and theological left, however, seem to think, that you can change reality to fit your beliefs and behaviors. Or is this more reasonable? Can we change our beliefs and behaviors to fit reality? Of course, that's the only thing we can do. Our beliefs are not going to change reality outside of our skulls. Reality is what it is. We're supposed to orient our beliefs and behaviors to fit reality. That's why you go to school, right? You're trying to align your beliefs with the truth. You're not trying to change the truth to fit your beliefs. But unfortunately, people in our culture, and some of them now sit in the White House, somehow think that you can change reality to fit your beliefs and behaviors. There's nothing more dangerous than that. That's just propaganda. In fact, let's do a logic check on the whole transgender issue if we can for a second, because you have people out there saying this: men and women are the same. Yet these are the same people also saying this: a man can transition into a woman. All right, if men and women are the same, why would you need to transition? Right? I mean, think about this. There are people out there that do experience gender dysphoria, which is very difficult to deal with. But most of the people in our culture today are not experiencing gender dysphoria. They are simply trying to change reality to fit their beliefs and behaviors. In fact, transgenderism presupposes fixed genders. Why? Because if I'm a man, but I think I'm a woman, I have to have some idea of what a man is and some idea of what a woman is in order to know the difference. Also, I'd have to have some idea of what a man is and some idea of what a woman is in order to try and make a so-called transition. If there were no fixed genders, there would be no such thing as transgenderism. Also, do you know the folks in the LGBT community have a bit of a civil war going on? Why? Because if the T gets their way, there are no fixed genders, then the L, the G, and the B don't exist. Because how can you be a lesbian, bisexual, or gay if there are no genders? It's totally fluid. You can't. And even the feminists have caught on to this. Because if there are no genders, there are no women. And now the first black woman on the Supreme Court doesn't even know she's a woman. How ironic is that? So logic is helpful here. Now, don't expect some political philosophies you see to make sense, but at least you can hopefully point this out to people. Also, some people will say this: diversity is our strength, yet we are all the same. How can that be? Ladies and gentlemen, is diversity really our strength? I want you to think about this. What does e pluribus unum mean? In the many, one, right? If you don't have unity, you don't have strength. Now, it's true we need diverse talents to have a strong team or a strong country, but you don't necessarily need diverse sexual behaviors to have a strong team or a strong country. You need diverse talents, but corporate America seems to emphasize activities that have nothing to do with the ability of a team to do something well in the public square. I mean, why do you think corporate America is so obsessed with sex? Why are we even talking about sex? Are we supposed to have sex at work? I mean, really, think about it. What's the point of this? On one hand, they incessantly talk about sex at work, and on the other hand, they're bringing up people on sexual harassment charges all the time. Well, maybe you should stop talking so much about sex at work. And maybe this wouldn't happen as much then. Now, there's another video that the Washington Family Policy Council put out where they went to Washington University in Washington State, or the University of Washington, And you probably have seen that video. That's actually more popular than the one I just showed you. And at one point, Joseph asked this young girl about boundaries, and she said, I feel it's not my place to say someone is wrong, to draw lines or boundaries. I feel it's not my place. Well, as Ben Shapiro famously said, facts don't care about your feelings, right? If you don't draw boundaries in your life, you are going to destroy your life and the lives of others around you. And of course, this is what God says in the Proverbs, the prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it. I mean, you obeyed boundaries to getting over here this morning, didn't you? You didn't just drive on any side of the road you wanted to, right? You just didn't go through any light you wanted to if it was red. You didn't drive on the sidewalk getting here. You stayed right and obeyed the laws, right? You stayed between the lines because boundaries can save your life. If you don't put boundaries on your life, you are going to destroy your lives and the lives of others. If you don't put boundaries on what you eat, you're going to be unhealthy. If you don't put boundaries on what you spend, you're going to be in debt. If you don't put boundaries on your sexual behaviors, you're going to be abandoned and you're going to be alone. Oh, but we're supposed to follow our hearts. If you follow your heart without any moral restraint, you're going to destroy yourself and destroy others. We can even see this in the animal kingdom. What do killer whales try and do? They try and get these sea lions, because they're very tasty to these killer whales, but sometimes they've got to get really close to shore to get them. And sometimes they go a little bit too far, and what happens to them? They're beached because they didn't respect the boundaries that their being requires for them to actually flourish. Without boundaries, we would all be dead. And yet you have people at our major universities saying, oh, there shouldn't be any boundaries, or I can't see imposing boundaries. C.S. Lewis was very wise on this. With regard to happiness, he said, all happiness requires restraint. Here's what he said. Surrender to all our desires obviously leads to impotence, disease, jealousy, lies, concealment, and everything that is the result of health, good humor, and frankness. For any happiness, even in this world, quite a lot of restraint is going to be necessary. If you're married in here, you know you have to restrain yourself quite a bit, right? You could run off with anybody you see at any moment, couldn't you, if you followed your heart? When you have children, you have to restrain yourself, don't you? Because if you don't restrain yourself, you could hurt them, because they can drive you crazy sometimes, can't they? In fact, I remember Dr. Geisler saying this once. Someone asked him, Dr. Geisler, have you ever thought of divorce? And he said, nope, never thought of divorce. Murder several times, but not divorce, right? Relationships are hard. They take work. They take restraint, don't they? So let's get to the key question now. Should I follow my heart? That's the key question we all want to answer, don't we? Well, what does the scripture say about your heart? Yes, Jeremiah put it this way, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? You shouldn't follow your heart blindly because it's deceitful. By the way, what's one of the biggest problems with deceit? When you're being deceived, you don't know it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be being deceived, right? Does your heart ever deceive you? It does. The whole book of Proverbs is really a testimony to the fact that Solomon says, my son, follow my words carefully because your heart will lead you astray. Why can't we follow our hearts? Well, I'm going to give you 3 reasons that we can't follow our hearts without any moral restraint. Sometimes God puts something on your heart you ought to follow. But a lot of times there are things put on your heart you ought not follow. Our hearts, number 1, are often selfish. Number 2, they're changing and conflicting. And number three, they're contrary to God's will and our own long-term best interests, if we really think about this. These are three major reasons you just can't follow your heart blindly. How about the first one? Our hearts are selfish. Look, it's easy to be bad. It's hard to be good. We all know this, right? Ask any 2-year-old or look at any 2-year-old, right? They call it the terrible twos for a reason, okay? It's easy to be bad. It's hard to be good. You might think, well, Frank, my heart really isn't all that bad. Let me ask you guys a question. Let's suppose this morning before you came over here, you went to the bathroom to get ready. You looked in the mirror and you saw that there was a sign attached to your head and it transmitted every thought you had in big LED letters. You couldn't turn the sign off. You couldn't cover it. Wherever you went, people could read your every thought. Would you be sitting here right now this morning? No, none of us would. Why? Because our hearts are evil. Because when we meet somebody for the first time, we're not thinking, oh, what a wonderful person. We're going, man, that's the ugliest shirt I've ever seen, right? Where did you get that haircut? I'm glad I look better than you. Right? You're evaluating people. By the way, this is no extra charge for this. This is why you can't remember people's names. Because when you meet them for the first time, well, hi, Bill. What, man, Bill, you are an ugly man. You are not thinking about the name. You're evaluating them because your heart is evil. And if we just follow our hearts without any restraint, we're going to get ourselves into trouble. Now, maybe Jim is going to talk about this later, so I won't talk about it a lot. But Jim, when he finds a murdered body, J. Warner Wallace, he knows there's only 3 reasons why that guy's dead. He doesn't have to think of 1,000 reasons. There's only 1 of 3 reasons why someone's been murdered. There was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue, or some combination of the 3, right? Sex, money, and power. Those are the 3 things that can trip any of us up. Now, sex, money, and power are good things, but they're so good, sometimes we'll take shortcuts to get them because we're selfish. We don't want to go through the proper means to get those things. We want them now. And we don't want to have to work for them. We want them now. So it's very easy to be bad. It's very hard to be good. That's, of course, why we need help from the Holy Spirit. And Paul talks about it in Romans 7, that he can't do what he wants to do. Our hearts are so bad that, as the Babylon Bee found, one study found this, 100% of men would eat any fruit given to them by a naked woman. Right? Is that true? Don't say you'd do any better than Adam, because you wouldn't. It's true. Our hearts are selfish. Secondly, our hearts conflict and change. Do you know that a decade ago, gender dysphoria affected 1 out of every 10,000, mostly men? Now, in some places, in some girls' schools, it affects 30% of girls. 30% of girls are saying they're trans. How is this happening? It's a social media contagion. That's what's going on. Girls are getting the idea that the best way for them to get out of their discomfort with their bodies and their growth, and maybe to get the kind of attention they really want, the best thing for them to do is to claim they're trans. Why? Because everybody's going to applaud you. Anybody who says what you're doing is harmful is going to be canceled and shouted down. There's also, when you're a teenage girl, the tendency to want to stick it to mom and dad. How did we go from 1 in 10,000, mostly men, to, in some places, 3,000 and 10,000, mostly girls? It's all social media. That's what's going on. People want recognition. That's part of the power thing, sex, money, and power. They want to be recognized. What's the easiest way to get recognized in our culture now? Claim you're trans. Claim you're part of the LGBTQ movement. Everyone's going to applaud you. It's not because there's some new biological gene they've discovered that's causing this. This is why social media for young people particularly can be so dangerous. In fact, not only do your hearts conflict, but they also change. You could have 1,000 things on your heart, right? You might be a happily married man, and you want to have a good family, yet you see someone that you find very attractive and you'd like to be with. Your heart's conflicting, right? You may want to be financially stable, yet you see something you really want to have, and you're going to go into massive debt to get it. Your heart conflicts all the time. What are you going to do? How about it changes? Do you know that despite President Biden coming out and saying you need to affirm every 3 to 5-year-old and anyone older than that in your home, if they're a child, you need to affirm what they think their gender is? Do you know that about 80% or more of young people that experience so-called gender dysphoria grow out of it by the time they're 18? Their hearts change. I mean, think about you. For those of you in here who are adults, are you the same person you were when you were 10? Has your heart changed since you were 15? What did you want to be when you were 15? How about 20? 25? In fact, Tim Keller, who's talked about this, I think, very eloquently at many points, says this. He says, if you look back on your, say, 15-year-old self, say when you hit 20, you look back on your 15-year-old self, you go, man, I was an idiot when I was 15, right? Then when you hit 25, you look back at your 20-year-old self and you go, man, I was an idiot when I was 20, right? You hit 40, you look back at your 25-year-old self, you go, I didn't have it all together when I was 25. I was kind of an idiot. You know what this means, according to Keller? You're always an idiot, right? Doesn't matter how old you are, you're always going to say, man, I was an idiot once you get further down the road. Now, thankfully, this slows down, okay? You know, when you're 50, you probably don't look back at your 45-year-old self and go, I was an idiot then, okay? Because why? You've matured. You've gotten more wisdom, more life experience. Your heart changes. Does it make any sense at all to give kids puberty blockers or, God forbid, top surgery because at 15 they think they want to be a man when they're a girl? When by 18, they're going to feel completely differently. It makes no sense at all. But the religion of sex and sexual license gets people to think that. We change. So don't think that your heart is going to stay the same. It's not. It's going to change. Makes no sense to follow a changing heart. Also, finally, our hearts contradict God's will. That's pretty obvious. There are many things we want, and normally they're related to sex, money, and power, that we see every day, and it's contrary to God's will, and it's contrary to our own best interests. How many lives have been destroyed by us indiscriminately following our hearts? I know we don't talk about this in church right now, and some of you are going to be annoyed with me, but so what? It's in the Bible, okay? How many kids have been scarred permanently by divorce? I'm not just talking about transgenderism here. I'm talking about all sexual sin. How many of them? Look, my dad died last year. He was 84 years old. If he had divorced my mother when he was 83, I'd be scarred. He just followed his heart. You can't indiscriminately follow your heart. In fact, again, I don't know if you saw this, the Babylon Bee discovered this. Hitler's newly discovered diary reveals he was just following his heart. And you go, Frank, that's ridiculous. What a ridiculous comparison. It was immoral what Hitler did. Exactly, that's the whole point. You can't follow your heart when it's immoral. And yet, most of the time, that's why we want to follow our heart, precisely because it is immoral. It's going to take us down the wrong road. We think it's going to bring us happiness and wealth and riches, but it doesn't. What does the Bible actually say about your heart other than it's deceitful and wicked? I think the most important passage in the entire Bible now, other than the gospel itself, the most important passage actually comes from the Old Testament for today's culture, and here it is. Above all else, guard your heart because everything you do flows from it. Guard your heart. Doesn't say follow your heart. Guard your heart, because everything you do flows from it. If you don't guard your heart, you are going to create havoc in your life and the lives of those around you. That's why Paul says in Romans 12, you got to renew your mind. Why would he say you have to renew your mind? Because your mind naturally is bent toward evil. It needs to be renewed. So you can guard your heart. Everything you do flows from your heart. So guard it. Don't follow it unless it's something God wants you to do according to the scriptures. God may lay something on your heart that is a good thing you ought to follow. But our biggest problem is sometimes, most of the time, things are laid on our heart, maybe not by God, but by the other side, to do something that's going to destroy rather than build up. Now, there's one objection we need to deal with this whole line of thinking here, and that is, doesn't love require approval? I mean, if you're truly going to love somebody, don't you have to approve of what they do? Ladies and gentlemen, how many people in here are parents? All right, how many people in here are former children? Okay, good. That's all of us, right? Question: if your parent approves of everything you wanted to do as a child, or approved of everything you wanted to do as a child, would that parent be loving? No. Love does not require approval. If you approve of everything somebody wants to do, you're not loving, you're unloving. In fact, what does Paul say in the great passage that everybody reads at their wedding, but nobody obeys? 1 Corinthians 13, love always protects. Love rejoices in the truth. Love always perseveres. If you truly want to love someone, you can't approve of the evil that they want to do. If you do love them, you'll stand in the way of that evil. In fact, Jesus said, I give you one new command. This is it. Love one another as I have loved you. How did he love us? He sacrificed for us. That's what love is. You sacrifice your own desires, your own resources, your own will to help others, to help the person you love. But a lot of times we won't do that. We will tell people we love what they want to hear so they won't be mad at us. Thomas Sowell, the 91-year-old economist, put it this way: when you want to help people, you tell them the truth. When you want to help yourself, you tell them what they want to hear. How often do we tell people what they want to hear because we don't want them mad at us? Guess what? You know what you're doing when you tell them what they want to hear? You're sacrificing them to help you. When you tell them what they need to hear, you might be sacrificing your own comfort to help them. We need to start telling people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. What did Judge Jackson say about the woman definition? She told people what they wanted to hear, didn't she? Rather than what they really need to hear, the truth. So, how do we find our identity then? Remember we said there are three ways? There's the ancient culture, which is follow your family. There's the modern culture, follow your heart. There's the religious culture, follow the rules. None of those are Christianity. What's Christianity? Well, you follow Jesus. You receive Christ's gift, and you're adopted into the family of God. You're just placed right into the family of God. You don't do anything to earn it. You know, Christianity is the only worldview where you don't achieve your identity, you receive your identity. It's free. Remember how we talked about this, that when you try and put together what's on your heart and you claim that's your identity, that actually isn't your true identity? There's one exception to that. Because if you're not just looking at an idea, if you're actually looking at the Savior and you say, I want to receive what the Savior has accomplished for me, when you accept him into your heart, not only is that your now new identity, but when God looks at you, he doesn't even see you anymore. He sees what Christ has done for you. So when you are forgiven, You're not just forgiven, you're also given his righteousness. Think about that. That identity you can't lose. You can lose your spouse, you can lose your children, you can lose your health, you can lose your money, you can lose your job, you can lose your reputation. You know, there's one thing in the world you can't lose. You can't lose Jesus. You can't lose God. That identity is secure right into eternity. You can't lose it. In fact, think about this. That you have a right to become a child of God, as the eyewitness John said, who wrote the biography we call the Gospel of John. Right in verse 12, he says that he's given you the right to become a child of God. Look at all the benefits you get. You're forgiven, you're loved, you're holy and blameless, you're sealed with the Holy Spirit, you're adopted into the family of God. You're trophies of grace, says Ephesians 2. You're God's workmanship, you're reconciled to God, you're an ambassador for God. What could be better than that? Oh no, I want to place my identity in a fleeting thought I had when I'm 15. Does that make any sense? No. You don't follow your heart, you guard your heart. By the way, if you have to achieve your identity, guess what? There's always somebody that can do it better. All the pressure's on you. And if you put your identity in another person, a mortal person, what happens when that person dies or that person leaves? Or you put your identity in what you do, what happens when you don't have that job anymore? You can't do it anymore. Have you lost your identity? Are you no longer a person with any value or worth? No, your identity is not found in what you do or even who you're married to. Your identity is in Christ, which you can't lose. You don't achieve it, you simply receive it. When President Biden said, "You're so brave," to these young transgendered people, in reality, it doesn't take much bravery in today's culture to say I'm trans, does it? You know what takes bravery? To say, no, I love you so much that I'm not going to support that, because it's not your identity. It's not who you are. In fact, I want to help you guard your heart, not follow your heart. Because if you follow your heart, again, it's not going to end well long term. By the way, do you know what the suicide rate is for people that have gender dysphoria and get the surgery? Do you know what it is? It's 19 times higher than the general public. Surgery doesn't fix the problem. You don't fix a mental problem with surgery. You fix it with psychiatry and biblical counseling. In fact, Dr. Paul McHugh at Johns Hopkins University put it this way. He said, transgenderism is like anorexia. You have a mismatch between your psychology and your biology. Imagine saying to an anorexic, I love you so much, I'm going to give you liposuction. You would say, what? No, you would tell the anorexic, your mind is not telling you the truth. Your body needs nutrition badly. Let's get it nutrition, and we'll work on counseling so you can change your mind. Yet we say to the person, the young person struggling supposedly with gender dysphoria, oh no, don't change your mind. We need to affirm your mind. We're going to try and change your body. You know it's impossible to change your sex? It's impossible. It's in every one of your 100 trillion cells. You can't do it. You can't change your sex. All you can do is change your mind. And so that's the kind of treatment we ought to give people with this. Now, I know this is all very heavy, but I think it's a message we need to think about and we need to stand up for, because we're not, by the way, I know there's some pastors in here. You can't avoid this issue, pastors. It's not going away. If you're not qualified to speak on it, do some reading. Figure it out. You need to address it. Young people are struggling with this everywhere. Much of them through no fault of their own. They're not getting guidance from the pulpit, unfortunately. You need to address it. One fun way you can address some of this is we just came out with a new book, as Jim said. It's called Hollywood Heroes, How Your Favorite Movies Reveal God. We go through all these different movie franchises: Captain America, Iron Man, Harry Potter. Harry Potter? Yeah, you'd be surprised how many parallels there are to the Christian story from Harry Potter. Also, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Batman, Wonder Woman. We take all these movie franchises and point out how all of these heroes in movie franchises point to the ultimate hero, Jesus of Nazareth. And they also have incredible biblical life lessons in many of these movies. And so you can teach this to young people without sounding all preachy, right? Hey, let's go watch Iron Man tonight and then talk about it, right? This book is not out yet, by the way. It doesn't come out till May 3rd, except if you're here, the only place you can get it on the planet is here, because we got some advanced copies. So it's at our book table out the door to the right, the Cross-Examined Impact book table. Also, if you text the word HEART to 855-909-0582, I'm going to send you this presentation in a PDF format. I'm going to send you the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist presentation in the PDF format. I'm also going to send you the How Can Jesus Be the Only Way presentation, which I'm supposed to do at 11 a.m. this morning in a PDF format. So just text the word HEART to that phone number, and we'll send you the first chapter of Stealing from God, a whole bunch of other stuff. I want to mention one other thing, and that is we need to start teaching apologetics to the very young. We have a brand new curriculum from 2nd grade to 5th grade on our book table. It only came out last week. It's called God is Real. So you may want to check that out. We have a teacher guide and a student guide as well. And there's another online course coming out for 6th to 8th graders that you can enroll your kids in this fall. So check all that out at the Cross-Examined book table. But I want to get out of the way now because the great Hugh Ross is going to come up here right now. We don't have a break between us. So ladies and gentlemen, I know Jim, where's Jim? Here he is. Come on up here, Jim. Let me get out of the way so Hugh Ross can come up here.